Welcome to Lead Different.
Welcome back to the Lead Different podcast. Today we're diving deep with Joe Coleman, founder and director of Saint Kolbe Studios. Joe's journey is a powerful testament to taking bold steps even when the path isn't clear. From a career in radio to freelance writing, Joe found his true calling, building a podcast production company dedicated to faith-driven leaders. In this episode, Joe shares the pivotal moment his wife challenged him to pursue his passion, the critical importance of doing the math before leaping into entrepreneurship, and how his faith has guided every step. You'll hear about the why not moments that shaped his success and the unique mission of Saint Kolbe Studios to glorify God and strengthen culture through truth-centered messaging. If you've ever felt stuck in a job that wasn't your dream or wondered how to align your work with your purpose, this conversation is for you. Get ready to be inspired by Joe's candid story of trust, resilience, and building a business that truly makes a difference. See you on the other side.
Why not leadership? Why not lead different?
Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Hello, Joe Coleman, and welcome to the Lead Different podcast. Thank you so much for being on. I've been looking forward to talking to you since I found you on LinkedIn through mutual connections and saw the work that you're doing, and wanted to have you on to share your talents, share your wisdom, and tell us a little bit more about what you do at Kolbe Studios. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You know, Joe, it's really cool to see people doing the work that you do so openly. You're the founder and director of Saint Kolbe Studios. You're a podcast production company, but you're dedicated to serving faith-driven leaders, businesses, and ministries. So what made you focus on that? Let's get some background history from you. Let's spend maybe a few minutes. Tell us where your journey started and how you ended up doing what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I do what I do now almost out of happenstance. I kind of fell into it. So my career started in radio. I was a broadcast radio host and a producer at a small radio station. This would have been 2019. So I've been doing this now about 7 years. I started there. I worked there about a year and then moved on. It was also the start of COVID. This was in Western Alaska. I was in the middle of nowhere, so it wasn't really where I wanted to be in the early days of the pandemic when nobody knew what was going on. So I went back home and I started freelance writing just because I didn't want to get a job in my hometown. I maybe felt some shame in that. But I started out as a freelance writer, and I made a decent living doing that. I did that for a number of years. Ended up taking an agency job writing. Wasn't a big fan of that. Took a sales job for a little bit. Wasn't a big fan of that, and realized that work was good, people were good and whatnot, but it just it wasn't a fit for me. I think to some degree entrepreneurship is more nature than nurture. This is my entirely unscientific theory. I think that not that you can't learn it and you can't become that, certainly, but I figure it's something kind of innate, kind of genetic. Like my dad ran his own business, his dad ran his own business. I think his dad did too. So it's turtles all the way down. And I realized that I couldn't find the sort of fulfillment or maybe the meaning I was looking for in working for somebody else. Because the job was fine, the money was fine, the work was perfectly all right, the people were good. Like it wasn't anything wrong with the job. I just realized that I needed to do something for me. I think maybe this is a flaw of mine that I can't get excited about other people's things, at least not in the same way. Maybe that's just human nature. I don't know. But I realized that it was time for me to go back out on my own. If I couldn't do sales for somebody else, that's the most freedom you get in a W-2 job. I went, all right, I'm just going to go do my own thing again. I've done podcast production before. I'm kind of burnt out on content writing. I'll do it if I have to make ends meet, but I'm going to make a go of it in audio. And we didn't starve. It took a while. Luckily, my wife was working part-time. I'd gotten married 4 months before I went back into working for myself. The second go around, I think about 4 months, give or take. So newly married, and I was kind of unhappy in it. My wife basically just goes, you either need to suck it up and get over it, or you need to quit. Like, you're coming home just beat, and you need to do something about it. She said it, I think, in more polite terms, but that is what she meant. And a couple weeks later, I went, okay, I hope you were serious because I just quit. She was like, great, okay. She she trusted that I'd made a good decision. And maybe a month later, we found out she was pregnant. So I think it's good timing on the Lord's part to push that one until after I had quit. Because truth be told, I don't know if I'd have quit and gone out and built this if I'd found out my wife was pregnant, while I was still at that job. And then once I found that out, I was like, all right, this has to work. And so far it has, and we're growing. I had her bringing in a couple grand a month to kind of offset in the early days, just to make ends meet for a while. We had some savings we pulled from. And now, we're doing all right. We're not going to get rich anytime soon, but, she doesn't have to work. She can stay home with the kid. We can pay, we can make payroll and whatnot. So it's kind of a haphazard journey. It sort of fell into it, but here we are.
Well, I love the story. There's so much you said there that I want to make sure we talk about. First one is because you posted about this and we chatted on it on LinkedIn. But those of you that aren't following, by the way, if you're not following Joe Coleman on LinkedIn, he does a great job of posting regularly. Follow him, find him. He's Joe Coleman, very just like it sounds, and he's the one that runs Saint Kolbe Studios. So if you need help finding him, but you talked about that ultimatum that your wife said, look, either quit or do something different. Right. And, there's a lot of, sometimes we're blessed with a spouse who will challenge us in a good way like that. And, you were challenged, you stood up to the challenge and you took her at her word. You went and said, you know what, I'm going to go do this for myself. I'm built Saint Kolbe Studios. Tell us about that conversation. I'd love to hear, you said she said it maybe nicer, but now then you went and did it. How did the conversation go when you got home, and what did you guys talk about? What were the important things that you said? Because those are the things that I think help people make that decision. If somebody's on the fence right now, I want to help them see how Joe Coleman and Mrs. Coleman went through it.
It's funny. I don't think this is going to be a good answer. Not much happened. She told me that, and I went, okay, let me think on that. And a couple weeks later, I quit, and I came back, and I went, I did it. She went, good. And that was kind of it. She was like, great, okay, you'll probably go make us money now. And I was like, yeah, I'll
Fabulous.
do that. I think it was probably a little more complex than that. It's been a while. I think I probably told her something like, I quit, and she went, good. And I went, okay, here's kind of my thought process. I was like, I'm already bringing in this much. I was doing some side work, just production and whatnot. And I went, all right, we've got this much savings. I think I broke the math down, sort of back of the envelope type math. Yeah. And I went, yeah, okay. We can probably run it net negative for 6 months or so. So basically, if based on what I'm already bringing in and what you're bringing in, if I don't make $1 past this for 6 months or so, we're fine. As long as, month 7, we start making some money, we'll be all right. And, I did the math. She liked the math and went, great, go do it. And I went and did it. I think there's, in terms of somebody listening to this on the fence, well, I don't know if that's a very helpful story. I think it's mostly, if you're not married, choose wisely. That will be a major determiner of your happiness, believe it or not.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you are, I think open and frank conversation is really the only way. She told me point blank, you need to quit or you need to get over it. And I did something about it pretty quickly. And then I told her my reasoning, and it was very sort of, ones and zeros about it. But I think we, and I'm not going to get down this rabbit hole too much, but I think we can kind of over-romanticize marriage a bit. We can certainly under-romanticize it, especially if you're kind of in a more trad persuasion. But there is this thing where it's like, oh, I have to have this big feelings conversation. And like, maybe, certainly you shouldn't be a robot about it, but there is some practical matter of, hey, we both respect each other and the way we view the world and the way we go about it. That's why we married each other. We just kind of take each other at face value. And I think that, I like to think that is very, properly loving. But it was just this sort of frank and honest thing of like, hey, this is what I think. This is what you think. This is how the math works. Great. And we both trust each other enough to just kind of run with it. So choose wisely. And if you've already done so, I speak honestly, and you should be all right. Maybe not in the short term. Might be unpleasant, but in the long term, you'll be all right.
Yeah, Joe, you might say that was a very simple conversation, but there's one thing that you did that's very important, and I think people forget. You did the math. Even if you do basic back of the envelope math, do the math. I think a lot of people get into this and get into entrepreneurship or starting a business, and they haven't done the basic math, and then they find themselves 2 or 3 months in, and guess what? We didn't do the math, and now I've got to go find a job. Maybe I'm going to go ask my employer to take me back, and then you're having a tougher conversation with somebody that you may not have left on good terms. Hopefully you did, but it's doing that math is important. Setting those limits is important. And then realizing, okay, what is it that I have to do? And I love something you said earlier in the conversation. You said you can't get excited about working for someone else or someone else's enterprise. I don't think that's a fault. You said maybe that's a fault of mine. I think we all inside want to make the biggest difference we can. Want to know where is it that we can use our talents to the best of our ability. And why work on someone else's dream when you can work on your own, I think. And so I think you made that choice, and I think you had a supportive spouse who said, hey, why don't you stop complaining about this thing that you're doing every day, and what is it you want to do? But let's take it one step further. I've been a big fan recently of, just listening to God. Because a lot of us, we ask kids the question, hey, Joe, when you were little, people always ask you, Joe, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. And when you graduate college, people are like, okay, so what are you going to do after college? Or where do you want to go to college? And I think the what we forget is to ask, what is God calling you to do? Right. What is God calling you to be when you grow up? Where is God calling you to go to school? And what is God calling you to do with those talents that you learned in school? So when you look at it that way, then you think of, okay, what am I being called to do? And then it brings us back to that other question that I love is, God, or that other quote, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. So he's going to call you to something and then qualify you. How did you mentioned you were on radio, you were in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of COVID, and you decided to come home. So that gave you the skills that you're using as a podcast producer. Tell us about what made you, was it more of a qualifying the called or calling the qualified, or was it a mixture of both for you?
I mean, it was probably a mixture of both. I think I certainly knew how to produce at like a decent level. The type of production you do in radio, at least the kind of radio production we were doing, is not as complex as the type of podcast production we do now. It's a little different, mostly because it's news oriented. Often, you're out on location, you're getting sound bites, with all sorts of background noise. So you're just kind of, your only goal really is to make the voice clear and kind of keep the background out as much as possible. It doesn't have to, sound NPR. It just has to sound clear, because ultimately we're just trying to convey information. The information is what matters. As long as we can do that well, it doesn't have to sound perfect. I definitely had to learn, relearn a bit and learn some more once I started getting back into it at a higher level. And luckily, I knew enough that the learning curve was pretty short. Pretty much everything I at least knew in relation to something else. So, the pickup process wasn't too bad. So I think it was partially calling the qualified. But at some point, I think if I knew, how do I want to put this? I figured it would work. I think it's really the only way to put it. I didn't really doubt myself. And maybe that's hubris. Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe you should doubt yourself a little more. I kind of had this feeling that it would work. Like it seemed like this is what I was supposed to do. I was certainly praying about it. There was plenty of times where I just didn't really almost didn't want it to work. It's like, I don't even know if I want to do this. Stuff seems to be working. Doors keep opening. We keep making more money. I wouldn't say I love it, but it's fine. I guess I'll just keep doing it. There was definitely parts where I figured that if God didn't want me to do it, it would have already failed. Like I look back on, now I look back on like year one of the business and I go, it's a wonder I made $1. Like all the things I did wrong, in hindsight, it's a wonder I made any money at all. And I figure that is the qualifying, the called part of it, because it shouldn't have worked, I think, but I just kind of always felt like it would, and I never had any real good reason why I thought that, because I didn't have a whole lot of clients, I didn't have a whole lot of money. I was pretty good at it, but I was certainly, out kicking my coverage in a lot of scenarios and just trying to make it up on the back end and figure out, like, I'd sold things that I figured I knew how to do, and I was like, okay, somebody bought it, I have to learn this, and I did, and it worked out fine. But man, it feels like it shouldn't have worked, and I shouldn't have been that confident in it, but I was in a way I can never quite explain. So I figured if God didn't want me to do this, he'd already let me fail, years ago. So there's got to be something to it.
Well, Joe, you're on the Lead Different podcast, and our company is the Why Not Leadership. So it sounds like you said, why not? Why not try it? That sounds like a why not moment that you had there, and because at the end of the day, you have to try. I think I just read recently. I quote this all the time because we believe that at the end of our life, we don't regret the things we did. We regret the things we didn't do. Sure. So we want to make sure we have is that we do take the opportunity when it comes up. Could you have stayed in that job where you were miserable coming home and your wife is wondering what the heck's wrong with Joe for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Time flies. Before you know it, your kids are grown and you're coming up on retirement and you've done a job that you hated for 30 years versus you took the chance. You said, why not? Went ahead and opened Kolbe Studios. And I love the mission. You help build and scale podcasts that aim to glorify God and strengthen culture through truth-centered messaging. So what I love about that is where, we know exactly who you want to help, but we also know what you do. You help remove the technical and operational burdens of podcasting. So what does somebody get if they work with you that they're not getting? What are the mistakes that people come to you with? You look at their podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, let me help you with this. And then who are your ideal clients? Who do you love working with?
Yeah, well, I'll take those in order. The first one, oftentimes it's how do you it's clients almost trying to bite a wall. There is so much going on, and there is so much to learn, or at least in their mind, there's so much to learn that they don't even know where to start, and it ends up almost always in poor audio quality. It ends up inconsistent uploads, show notes that don't really do anything meaningful, that are either pretty much useless in terms of ultimately, I'm not going to get into the weeds of this, but ultimately show notes, at least in my opinion, exist to give an overview of what's in the episode, so somebody looking at it who's not yet bought it on the podcast can see what they can expect. And it exists to put resources in, links to stuff, links to books, websites, materials that you mentioned in the show. That's pretty much all it does. So people will usually, that I see pretty often, they're either writing absolutely nothing, or like the Iliad is in their show notes. It's like completely useless.
The Iliad.
And yeah, no, truthfully, you should see how many paragraphs are in some of these. And things like that where there's so many problems they don't know where to start, and people are they've either got a tech stack that is just much too much for them, or they're doing absolutely nothing. And there is a decent learning curve to editing audio. It's pretty steep. Now, once you get to the top, you're kind of fine. Like an amateur can learn it for sure. One of our biggest value props is you don't have to learn it. Like it is actually a decent bit of work. But it's a real steep learning curve, but the learning curve is fairly short. So if you wanted to do it, truthfully, you could. It's just usually people don't have the time or the interest or both. And which, kind of leads into your second question of who do we work with, like primarily, or who do we want to work with?
Mm-hmm.
we find that the easiest person to work with is it's much easier to work with organizations rather than individuals. Now, we work with some individuals, love working with individuals. In some way, that's more fun because it's a little more one-on-one. But if you're not a successful business, and I mean successful in sort of a liberal sense of the term, like you don't have to be, 60% profit margin or something like that. You just have to be, bringing in enough money that spending $2,000 on your podcast services a month is a line item in your marketing budget that you pay attention to, certainly, but like it's not going to bankrupt you. Ultimately,
Right.
that's what we're trying to find. Because if you, and ultimately, I just go, look, this is a vehicle. It's a marketing vehicle. It is the top of funnel for a lot of people, or maybe mid funnel, depending on who you are and what you're doing. But it's ultimately just marketing. So you need to have the money in your marketing budget to do this. That's who we like to work with, mostly because it's most sustainable. Those type of people, they are less likely to not have the money to do it at a certain point, which means we can work together longer, which means we can make longer term plans. We can focus on steadier incremental growth as opposed to trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get this with with a limited budget and a limited timeline? How do we get this really successful? Which, especially in podcast land, is actually pretty difficult. Certainly not impossible, but in the way you can't quite hack the algorithm of a podcast in the same way that you can do it with YouTube. Like they're two different animals. So short-term growth is much more difficult in podcast land. Now, your listeners are much stickier. I think it's better, but growth is tougher. So we like to have people who can reasonably commit to 50 episodes before they see like really meaningful growth. And obviously, you see stuff along the way, but the data shows that 50, really 100 episodes. Like if you make it to 100 episodes, you're good. You will make money on this. If you have a business and you've got some backing, you can get probably as early as 50. That's my theory. But you really do need some juice behind it. Like if you're an individual doing this as a passion project, I mean, heck, we'd love to help you. And if you want to throw the money at it, like great, you can do something really cool. But it is more difficult because it's a larger percentage of your income, likely, unless you happen to be quite wealthy, then great, but give me a call. But we do a lot of work in this vein. We were talking before we started recording about your daughter at a classical school. We do a lot of work in like classical traditions, classical schools, classical ed, literary podcasts, like the sort of classical ed Substack academic sort of world. We do a lot of work in there, which I love. I love working. I love doing that stuff. It's something I enjoy. I enjoyed before I got into this, and now we get to do a bunch of those podcasts, which I get a real kick out of doing. So and those tend to be organizations that they can invest the money, they can find that stickier growth or that that stickier listenership, and so everybody wins. It's great. Love that. Yeah, I love doing that.
That sounds good. So let me ask you this question, because I love the technical aspects, what you help people do. I get an idea of who you want to work with. You mentioned we heard and we read that you believe podcasting is the most trust building medium in today's digital landscape. And you talk about the fact that there's so much short form content out there, so much noise and low quality content. So you think long form podcasting is a better channel for meaningful engagement, for audience loyalty and cultural influence. What do you base that on?
Couple of things. One, the way I break it down is this. In human psychology, people like to do business with their friends. They like to interact with their friends. They would like to, in an ideal world, do commerce with their friends. Most of their friends work for other businesses. They probably cannot do commerce with their friends, at least not in a meaningful sense for most people. The next best thing, psychologically, is doing business with entities that you trust. And podcasting, I think, builds that trust better than anything, primarily because it's a medium that people opt into, as opposed to something that is either algorithmically served to you or is promoted to you via ads or promoted to you via some collaboration, like YouTube in the last, I don't know, 6-12 months, whenever this happened, fairly recently, has this feature where you can collaborate. And my theory on this is, two channels, they do a collab, they'll each channel will pop up in your subscriptions now, and now I've got somebody I'm not subscribed to who's in my subscriptions. Now, theoretically, the best case version of this is a creator I might also be interested in because it's adjacent to somebody I know. Sure, whatever. I'm not saying it's bad, but it is one. It's people say podcasting is saturated. There are infinitely more YouTube channels. There are infinitely more blogs out there than podcasts. I mean, heck, like half of all podcasts are just dead. Like they're in a graveyard. They exist on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and whatnot, but like they haven't uploaded in 6, 12, 18 months. So
right.
You're actually not competing. And this is back to my original point, or my previous point about who we like to work with. This is why we really like working with organizations, because they tend to already have some amount of interest, and why you can probably make the case that podcasting is the best medium for it, because it's actually mid-funnel instead of top of funnel, which I think is probably a better way to think about it. You already have, like, we built a podcast it's called the Familiaris podcast. It's like an education, rather, consulting, an education consultancy. That's a tough, say that 5 times fast. But the woman who runs it, she already has a decent email list. Same with, we built a podcast for Arcadia Education. They're like a headhunter for classical schools. They already have a decent email list. If you are somebody mid-funnel, you've already got a good email list. People already like your product. I use product in like a very loose sense, your product, your service. When you say, hey, actually, here's more ways for you to engage with us. Not everyone in your email list is going to listen to a podcast, obviously, but enough of them will, because, and specifically because I don't think short form content works on its own. I think it has a place in a full marketing ecosystem, but I don't believe in it because, and I won't get too into the weeds on this. Basically, people consume short form content in very different. I think actually more properly, people consume short form content. I don't actually think it's probably proper to say you consume a podcast, like which is a really interesting thing, right? Like the way we talk about consuming content. I hate that word, but like it is what we say. You don't really consume a podcast. Like that's just not how, like, people listen to a podcast. Like they watch a podcast, but like they consume content. And I think the fact that we use different words for this is really meaningful. Short form content is meant to be consumed. It's bite size. You can scroll infinitely. It doesn't really build a lot of trust. And I know this from the data that we've seen from podcasts that'll pull clips, and we look at how many people watched it and compared it to the subscribe rate. A really good short maybe get you 10 new subscribers on YouTube. And that's only going to YouTube. That's actually, maybe they go to Spotify, maybe they go to Apple Podcasts, but that's an extra step. That's not a bit of friction. And you probably lost 7 of those. And maybe some of them watch on YouTube. People do watch podcasts on YouTube, or they listen to them on YouTube. But the fact that we say consuming all content, but we watch podcasts and we listen to podcasts, I think is probably the most meaningful thing for our relationship to the medium. There's a reason people listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast, but it's really difficult to get your average person to go watch like Chris Nolan's The Odyssey whenever that thing comes out, because that's going to be like 4 hours long, guaranteed. Because people lean into it, they feel it's valuable, they feel it's entertaining. You can't help but kind of have an affinity for somebody who you've spent a lot of time with. And you actually only spend large chunks of time with podcasters. This is why YouTube works pretty well, too, in a different medium than we do it, and especially with the younger demo. And streaming, even better. Like, this is why live streaming is taking off, and I have my problems with that. But you are spending a large amount of time with a person. And it's actually impossible to spend large amounts of time with somebody and not like them more by the end. If you just are repulsed by them, you'll stop. You won't spend any more time with them. You'll stop doing it. But if you're neutral to mildly positive and you spend 90 minutes a week with them, compound that over a year, you're going to have an affinity for them. Guaranteed. That's just how human nature works. You can't get that in any other medium. You can't do that in short form content. You can't even do that in YouTube for the most part. You, at least for the demos, I should, to be more precise, I should rephrase that. You can't do that in YouTube for the demos broadly that we are trying to hit. If you're trying to sell, Feastables to 12-year-olds, you can absolutely do that. But for, the people that our clients are trying to target, there is no better way to get people to spend time with you than for them to opt in to having you in their ears or, on their computer screens, or whatever, however they're listening, however they're watching. People opt in to spending an hour a week with you, 52 hours a year. Like, they can't help but like you. And when whatever your product, your service, your thing is, when that need they have comes up, you're top of mind now, just because you were consistently there. I think it's impossible to listen to somebody's podcast for a long enough time, commit to listening to it weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, and not have an affinity for them at the end of the year. There's no way around it, and that's why it works.
No, I really like the way you mention it. It is top of funnel. It is really about building that awareness so that when that need comes up, you're the first person they think about. And I really liked what you had to say about podcast growth. So tell me, there's something that not everybody knows. I know I work with a lot of coaches and consultants, and I work with companies. So my clients are CEOs and founders, but they're also a lot of coaches and consultants who are in the industry that I'm in. What is a good growth rate for a podcast? And let's just look at YouTube, because this podcast is going to be on all the podcast platforms, but it's going to be on YouTube, and that's where we do our video. We'll share our video there. I think I think Spotify is now showing video. One of the other podcasts is now showing
Spotify
video. So
Apple now show video.
And Apple show video.
Dropped this. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really cool. So you might be watching us or you might be listening to us, but what is, I'd love to hear from you. What is a good growth rate for someone who's starting out? So even like the Lead Different podcast, we've only been around for about a couple of years. We're about to hit our 100th episode, which you mentioned is a key, right? Getting to that 100th episode. But how should you be growing, and how does Saint Kolbe Studios help you grow even faster? What are some of the things? And you mentioned the show notes. I think you're absolutely right. Those have to be good. They have to give people good information so that they can make a decision on whether or not they want to listen. But also, we're going to include in our show notes how to contact Joe Coleman, how to go see some of the work that you've done. And if you've got a special link that we want to make sure we talk about, we'll talk about it and put it in the show notes. But tell us two things. What's a good growth rate? What is a growth rate multiplier that people get if they work with Saint Kolbe? And what are some great things that you want to make sure you include in show notes so that they're positive? So the 3 questions. I keep throwing 3 questions at you at a time. Sorry about that, Joe.
I think I'm about to disappoint a lot of people who are hoping for something. I'm not wildly worried about growth rates. Obviously, your podcast needs to be growing, otherwise something's going wrong. Broadly speaking, I think of download numbers as vanity metrics. They're useful, and I'm not saying you shouldn't pay attention to them. But if you want to get, 10,000 downloads overnight, you should start a YouTube channel. You should optimize that. You should go that route. I think what people get wrong about podcasting and podcast growth, rather, it tends to be the thought that, I just need to grow. I need to grow. Maybe. What I'm more worried about is, does the podcast pay for itself? Downloads are only really useful numbers, and you only really want to focus on pumping up your downloads if the point of the podcast is to sell advertisement placements. If the point of the podcast is ad placements, great. Okay. What I would say, you're I don't know, you want to go 10% a month. The growth rate is really going to depend on what your current listener base is. Yeah, maybe you want to shoot for 10% a month. Let's say, in 10 months, you've doubled your subscribers.
Right.
If you want to sell ads, sure. That makes sense. However, I don't think of selling ad placements as a good monetization strategy for your podcast. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I think if an advertiser comes up to you and goes, hey, I know about your audience. I want to serve them ads about my product because I think it's aligned in, XYZ way. Valuable for you, valuable for me, valuable for them. Everybody wins. Great. Yeah, I think that's fine. However, I'm much more interested in booked calls that reference the podcast as their point of referral, or sales from the podcast. Whatever booked calls and whatever sales looks like to you, depending on whether you're in the coaching industry, the finance industry, or like a lot of our clients are in academia, are in writing, or in literature, are in Substack. That probably means more magazine subscribers, more Substack subscribers, etc. I'm actually much more interested in that, because that's where your money comes from. I mean, you can chase downloads till the cows come home, but unless it's the right people, and this is just it's the same problem that business owners have, the same mistake business owners make as podcast hosts make. You can chase everybody, but if you're chasing everybody, you're chasing nobody. You are not finding the right audience fit. It's the same way in podcasting. I would much rather have 1,000 engaged subscribers than 50,000 unengaged ones, and that's not unique to podcasts, and that's unique to all media. So I guess it's not particularly unique. That is all media, and really it's all business ultimately. Like, you just want to find like what's my total addressable market for this podcast? Might only be like 25,000 people. And you might only get 2,500 of them. But if 250 of them buy and you're selling, something that's high ticket, great, you're good. Like, you're fine. And this is why, to kind of go back to, who we work with, it's a lot easier, or to expand that question, who should have a podcast? I mean, to some degree, I think everybody should, because it is valuable. But it's going to be a lot easier if you have a high ticket item. And a high ticket, even defined as, I don't know, $500 per sale or something like that. More is certainly better. But there is kind of a floor, because if you don't have a high ticket item, or you're just trying to sell ads, you have to chase people. You have to chase numbers. You have to chase downloads. And then you have to just do what works. Oh, okay, this episode that was sort of rage bait about Pope Leo worked. Great. Now I make Taylor Marshall blush with my just wild takes or something like that. Like, you can go, no disrespect to Taylor Marshall. He's in my neck of the woods. Nice fellow. But you can go for that, but it's not really going to do anything. Or worst case scenario, it does do something that's really bad for your soul. So I know this is kind of a non-answer, and maybe it's unsatisfying for listeners, but that really is the case. It really is the case that downloads are a useful metric, but I'm looking at what are my conversion rates. And podcasting is notoriously tough to track conversion rates on. You can get like UTC or whatever they are, the links, like, trackable links. You can put them in your show notes, see who's clicking those links. You can see, did my website traffic spike after I dropped an episode? Things like that. There are sort of secondary and tertiary bits of data that I think are much more valuable than downloads. Because if you're making $10K a month off of your podcast that gets you 700 downloads an episode, who cares? Who cares that you don't have 7,000? Like, just keep doing what you're doing, increase the volume, increase the time, and it will just follow. So that maybe that is a bit of a non-answer, but truthfully, that is absolutely my thought process on podcasting and on business in general. We've had pretty slow, steady growth, and I'm fine with that. We don't chase numbers because it's just not a good long-term play.
I don't think that's a non-answer. I think that's a really good answer, because here's the thing. I was thinking about that. Last year, I had a former high school classmate. So it was a local connection who's a CEO of a local organization call me. And this is the stuff we don't get, right? We have people who are following us that don't subscribe to our channel, people that listen to our podcast and they never subscribe. And so he calls me out of the blue. I get a text message. He's like, "Hey, Dan, I'm doing a kickoff meeting for my company, and I've been watching your podcast, and I'd love for you to give the keynote." Literally out of the blue, somebody just, so, that turns into a nice engagement, it's a 5-figure engagement. Yep. And so I look at you, when you talk about that, you're spending $2,000 a month on your podcast. If you get 2 or 3 5-figure engagements from that podcast,
Easy.
It pays for itself. The math does itself. So the first one is break even, right? So maybe 24,000 in engagements a year. But I think you're looking at the right things. How many people are calling you, or are you calling that they say, hey, I've been following your podcast. I really like what you do. I saw the interview you did with Joe Coleman. I learned a lot. Are people getting value from the podcast? And is that leading to conversion rates? And I think you hit it on the head. Vanity metrics are for, if you're going to sell advertising, then you've got to have that many. But is it leading to sales? Is it leading to awareness of what it is that you do?
Yeah.
In order for people to say, hey, or I don't know what Dan does. I just had a conversation with him. I'm going to go check out his podcast. And do they learn something valuable? And then they say, you know what? He's got credibility. I saw him talking to someone who is an expert in this field. Joe Coleman is an expert in podcast production. And Joel said some valuable things that helped us with our business. So that's really good. When you think of a high ticket item, when you said high ticket, I was expecting to hear 5,000, 50,000, no, you said 500.
If you have something that ticket, but
yeah. You need less of those in order to pay for the podcast. So that makes a lot of sense. And so you addressed the other question that I had that's important is how do you measure that ROI, right? Yeah. Because how are you measuring where the clients are coming from? Unless you're doing a survey or a question, hey, how did you hear about us for somebody
which
that
you should be doing at every possible opportunity, top down, not just for the podcast, but I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is a big thing of mine. You should be doing that. Ask every single time. Like, don't be annoying about it, but like every single like organic opportunity. Somebody like our discovery call format requires you to fill in where'd you hear about us. Facebook, Google, our podcast referral, LinkedIn, website, whatever. Like people will tell you. If I went, if somebody came up. Or if you came up to me and was like, hey, you did on the intake form. Where'd you hear about us? Yeah, just ask.
Right.
I'm going to go, oh, where did I hear about you? That's interesting. Oh, I heard about you. You were on somebody else's podcast. Click.
Right.
Okay, great. Do that as often as often as is proper is maybe the best way to put it. There's no magic, there's no silver bullet. But people just, I find business owners just aren't asking.
Just ask. I like that.
Hey, where'd you hear about us? Do you want to tell your friends about us? We'll give you some money for it. Just ask. People will. Not everybody will, but who cares? Just do it every single time, and some of them will. And one thing before we get too far afield, to your last point, you got that engagement off of somebody who you didn't even, you knew but didn't know you were listening to the podcast. Algorithms, because they've gotten so good, and this is, ironic enough, it's a problem. I mean, algorithms being good is a problem in its own, but this specific problem is that the algorithm understands you and your interests pretty well, such that it can serve up a podcast to you every single time a new episode drops, and you don't have to be subscribed to it.
Right.
It will just come in your feed, and this is a huge problem for YouTube creators right now. It's less of a problem for podcasters because it's not as algorithmic, but it is a problem. It is really easy, especially if you're somebody who watches podcasts on YouTube or like listens to them in a background tab. It's actually really easy to not subscribe to them, but still be engaged with the podcast. You still get that sort of that engagement, that the created affinity, but you don't know. Like, I mean, Dan, I'm sure you've experienced this. I've had plenty of instances where somebody be like, "Oh yeah, like I see your stuff on LinkedIn all the time," and I have no idea who this person is. Like, they've never interacted, with anything I've posted or something like that, which obviously is fine. I don't need you to. It's just this funny thing of like, I have no idea who you are. Not even in like a sort of condescending way. Like, truly, you have never interacted with anything I've put out there, but you seem to think it's valuable, or, educational, entertaining, whatever. And I had no idea. And then, they'll go, oh yeah, I want to buy, podcast services, or I was referred. Like, we've had people be referred from other people who I've never heard of, but they know about our stuff. And it is this really fascinating thing. And it's a great frustration I recognize for people running podcasts, people running any creative endeavor. But this is just one more reason why I go, downloads, they don't matter. Maybe that's certainly hyperbolic. I don't know. Clip that, put it in the cold open. But like, downloads kind of don't matter If your other numbers are good, if you're getting engagement, if you're properly collecting that data and asking, hey, where did you hear us? And people say, oh, I heard about you on the podcast. Who cares what your downloads are? If the money is coming in, the algorithm is good enough where subscriptions are optional, which is very frustrating and kind of difficult to track. But that's just the reality. And I think people need to understand that. It can be kind of discouraging to see low numbers, but the numbers are kind of a lie. So as long as you know what to track and how to track it, these sort of secondary and tertiary data points, you're doing fine. You might actually be much more successful than you think you are.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying there is track the right things.
Yeah.
It's important to track the right things. Joe, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about is one of the things in your introduction, we talked about the fact that you build and scale podcasts that aim to glorify God and strengthen culture through truth-centered messaging. So there's no doubt the name of your company is Saint Kolbe Studios, and you build and scale podcasts that aim to glorify God and strengthen culture. Where does that mission come from? Tell us about why it's important to work with podcasts that aim to glorify God and strengthen culture. And then let's talk about the origination of Saint Kolbe Studios.
Sure. On the first part, I think I'm not a man who romanticizes things. I hope my wife doesn't hear this, but I tend to think about it as this is a niche nobody's really filling. And I mean, there are a handful of like Catholic podcast producers and some agencies, although I know at least one of them has kind of pivoted out of it and into a different market. So, I mean, we're a fairly big fish in a small pond. To some degree, it was just, well, this is what I know. This market I understand pretty well. Nobody's really serving this market, at least not in a meaningful sense. Seems like I should do it. And people liked it. So that to some degree, it was just that. I needed a niche because I can't compete with Sweetfish. I think it's Sweetfish and all these other like big ones that are just massive conglomerates. All of them are in the UK. I don't know what's up with that. All the major podcast producing organizations, entities, all of them are in the UK. I don't know what's going on with that. I've yet to figure it out. But so I went, okay, I can't really compete with them. Here's a niche. Okay. And to some degree, I like to think it's a nice thing we get to offer to faith-based, leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, things like that, where we can say, okay, we both believe the same thing. Even if, somebody's not Catholic, we at least share the same general moral tenets. We disagree on transubstantiation and the perpetual virginity of Mary and whatnot, but we do believe the same thing at the core, and we can argue our theological differences after hours, but we do share a common mission, the glorification of God on earth and the salvation of souls and all that good stuff. Okay, great. In that, you can understand, or you can come to expect that there is a certain way in which we are going to treat you, and there's a certain expectation in how you were going to treat us, my team and whatnot. We share a culture, and I'm not going to get down this rabbit hole, but it is difficult especially in the U.S. in that the U.S. is a multicultural place. It's actually kind of difficult to have the exact same footing because people came here from so many places, and we have an American ideology of sorts, but you can't appeal to like one universal culture, at least not in like a national sense or an ethnic sense. But what you can do is you can appeal to, we share the same Christian culture, and if you believe that means something, and I believe that means something, that actually does influence how we treat one another. So not only are we in a niche, we are also, I like to think, offering something better, something that says we never guarantee success, certainly, but we are incentivized to help you succeed as best we can, not just so you continue to give us your money, although that is certainly a part of it, but because what you're doing is good, and we share your conviction in doing things that are good, properly speaking, true and good, capital T, capital G. And we both want that to be broadcast. I would like you to make money while doing it so you can afford to do more of it, and you can spend more of your time doing these good things. And I can, put food on the table, I can pay my people, all that. and that's the I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed, especially as of late. We've launched a few podcasts. They all kind of went out at once, just sort of shook out that way. And we got a bunch of people all at the same time, kind of sending nice notes and being like, thank you for the help and whatnot. And it was this real neat moment because business is lonely sometimes. It's difficult,
Right.
And it was this real neat moment of like, oh, we are doing something cool. We are offering something that is not, for better or worse, not really being offered. And so we can now do that, and we can hold these things in common, which, that is the Christian life as much as you can live it, in a remote sense and like in a digital sense.
Right.
Like we can't quite hold things in common, strictly speaking, but we can hold a culture in common, even though we are, in different time zones and whatnot. And being able to do that is, it's a gift. It's been good, and I hope it's been beneficial to those we work with.
Well, you always hear from the unhappy, right? And if somebody's unhappy with the way something went, you always hear from them. But it's nice to hear when somebody's like, hey, our podcast led to this, or we just got a note, or we got a client that literally just came to us because of the podcast, because of something that they heard, the way you produced it. I love that you brought the transcendental desires, truth, goodness, and beauty. I think that's another part that you bring, right? Because if you obviously work with video podcasts. So how a podcast looks is important. How it sounds, that's part of that beauty that you're helping create. Because if the sound isn't good, if we were hearing tinny sound, if somebody, I don't have a particularly deep voice. So if I get too far away from my microphone, you hear a very different voice than the one you're hearing when I'm doing it properly. Those are all things that are important, that are aesthetic, that help people want to listen longer. Having quality guests like yourself who are just providing so much value and adding so much information to people that are looking for this kind of information. You mentioned something when I asked the question about why you work with the people that you do, and it's so very important. It's a tenet of what we do when we work with executives and building messaging. We always say this: when you tell people what you believe, you attract people who believe what you believe. So but you have to put it out there. As you said earlier, you can't please, if you're trying to please everyone, you're going to please no one. Yeah. So tell people what you believe. That helps you attract the people who believe what you believe. And then we're talking along the same lines, right? Whether or not we're exactly the same faith or we're just fellow Christians, we do believe, as you said, in the saving of souls and glorifying God. So those are things that are important to both of us, so we can work on those. The other thing I know that happens when you tell people what you believe is you repel people who don't believe what you believe. Right. So you're not working with someone who's going to come in here and say, well, you can do that, Joe, but we don't talk about God here, or we don't say God bless you. Right. Mm-hmm. Those are, those awkward situations for someone who is a person of faith. So you repel the people that don't believe what you believe. But I've added a third part to that, and that is you might make somebody curious. Mm-hmm. You might actually evangelize by letting people know what you believe. If you say it in a way that sometimes, there's someone out there that's just waiting to hear the message in a certain way. And you might just say something today that causes someone to say, you know what, I'm going to go listen to that. What are those? What are the three things? The transcendental desires, truth, goodness, and beauty. Yeah, I kind of believe in those things. What is that? How does that relate to the religion? So I really appreciated you bringing that up. Joe, one of the things that we want to make sure we talk about here before we finish up is leadership. How are you leading different today? Because now you have a team, you have people, you're a leader in your family also. I'm sure you're a leader in your community. How are you leading different today than you were 7 years ago when you were working for someone else? What's changed? If somebody was to say, this is what I see different in Joe Coleman today than what I saw 7 years ago, I guess 2019, right? It was when you made the decision. What's different today versus then?
Yeah, well, I mean, immediately in the practical sense, I have people working for me as opposed to working for somebody else. sort of low level with no one below me to lead. And I suppose you can get into like leading up and whatnot. But there is a certain gravity to responsibility. At least there ought to be. I think if you're taking it seriously, it is properly speaking a weight on your shoulders, and like you should feel it. It should be kind of, maybe I don't want to say it should be difficult, because I suppose you're properly virtuous. Virtue is easy, but it should be at least poignant, and it should be heavy, whether or not it's easy to carry. It should be on your shoulders. You should be aware of it. And I think that the biggest difference now is the realization that there are things beyond me, which maybe sounds silly and selfish, but it's easy to know that in principle before you run a business, or before you get married, before you have kids. But and you go, oh yeah, I know there's stuff outside of me, but functionally I don't have to think about that, more or less. I mean, maybe you were better than I am in your early 20s. I certainly didn't have a robust sense of the other when I was, 21. But now it is, it's a constant reminder that everything I do has weight, because it affects those who are not me. Like, if I live a kind of broke life and I'm just eating ramen all the time and living in mild squalor, like, yeah, that's fine. Men are simple creatures. Like, I could do it. I'd prefer not to, certainly, but it's not really a big deal if I eat rice and beans for every meal for a few months because nothing's going right. But when you have a wife, you have kids, that they prefer a higher standard of living if you can afford it than eating rice 3 times a day and living in a 400 square foot apartment. And now, when you add employees into the mix, when you add team members, contractors, whatever you got into the mix, those people have to get paid, not just because you owe them, but actually because you, in a sort of transitive sense, owe their families. You right. are, the in some sense, you're the landlord of your own little fiefdom when you run a business. Whatever graft the modern onto that. You not only owe a debt to your employees, your contractors, you actually kind of owe a transitive debt to their families, the people they care for, because you are the direct point between other people's money and them putting food on their table. So your responsibility only expands the more successful you become. So the better we do. We're breaking our previous record every month so far this year. We're on, it's only March, so it's early. But January was our best month ever, then February is our best month ever, and March is on track to be our best month ever. We're only expanding, and I can expand my team now, and that's, it's great. It's exciting. I get to do cool things. I get to, make jobs and be useful, but it is heavy,
right.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, even if it's still like made of cardboard. Like it is still a difficult and weighty thing, and I think it should be. This isn't to say that I'm so morally upstanding. It's just, if you're paying attention and you take this seriously, it is difficult and weighty, and that's just good. That's a proper understanding of your responsibility. So I think the understanding that what I do echoes to all who work for me and to their families and to those they care for. That's, if you sit and think about that like that,
right?
That's a lot, but it's a good problem to have, but it is something to take seriously. And I think I now get to do that, which is a privilege and a curse all at once.
Yeah, Joe, that's a really great answer. And I think it speaks to the seriousness of the importance of good leadership, and the fact that you're thinking of those things tells me you're probably a pretty good leader who cares about the people that you are responsible for and the people you care for with your clients also. Joe, is there anything I've forgotten to ask that you want to make sure we talk about today?
Oh man, I don't think so. I hope the audio sounds good. We're in a new space, and viewers of this may see a half a ladder out of frame. So hopefully this doesn't sound too echoey. We are expanding. We got a new office recently, which has been very cool, but we're still in the midst of it. Actually, you know what? One thing I would like to say, there is some confusion sometimes with people who wonder if we can work with them or not.
Right.
Do you need to? I know we're at time, so I won't. I feel strongly about this. I won't go down it though. Yeah. Do you need to run a faith-based podcast to work with us? And the answer is just no. And primarily, it is my belief, and I love God's Not Dead 6 and whatnot, but just because it's Christian doesn't mean it's good. And actually, often because it's Christian does mean it's bad, with some exceptions. Triumph of the Heart, the movie about Saint Kolbe, beautiful, love that. And I think we're coming into a renaissance, certainly, of at least Catholic art. I don't know about Christian stuff. Maybe Protestant stuff is doing well, but the answer is no. Mostly because I believe that if you are doing something well, it just glorifies God, and you can do that directly and indirectly. The guy who runs an HVAC company and does that to the best of his ability and treats his employees well and his customers well and whatnot glorifies God because he does it for the Lord and for the Lord's creation. You don't have to be directly doing that. Great to do that too. This is not to knock Catholic media and whatnot, but I feel quite strongly about this. You can actually just doing something well is an act of glorifying God, and it is. Yeah. And it is that simple. I know we got a little distracted, so I will answer a question you started to ask a while back about Saint Kolbe.
Yeah, I was exactly going to say. Now that you brought it up, where did the name Saint Kolbe come from?
Yeah. So Saint Kolbe is I didn't know this actually before I kind of got into it a while back. Saint Kolbe is considered a patron saint of communications. Not in every publication about him. There's some that'll call him patron saint of prisoners and addicts and things like that, which I think he is as well. But he created a radio station. He also created a newspaper, and I think it's done really well in Triumph of the Heart. I think you can still stream that if you didn't see it in theaters.
Yes,
link in the show notes. But
perfect. We'll put it in there.
Yeah, he there is a Militia the Immaculata, I think is I don't know what it is in Polish. It's crazy language, but that newspaper, that periodical, it still exists. Yeah. I don't think the radio station still, actually it might. The radio station might still exist, but he was a patron saint of modern media at the time and went, okay, this at least, and there's a very large debate to be had about whether social media and things like that can actually be used to glorify God, and we don't have time for it. But he at least looked at radio and print and went, okay, these ones seem good. This does not seem opposed to God. This seems it can be used for God. Yeah. And his the great critique of him from his brothers was, it seems he loves the machines more than us. And I get that. And I think business owners often can, especially people who aren't particularly on the the emotional side of the rational emotional spectrum, aren't hyper emotional. Especially I think business owners broadly are hyper rational, if anything. And it's actually really easy to fall into that. I try not to, but I certainly do. All right, let's operate this machine. Mm-hmm. Well, your concerns are valid, but I can't deal with those right now. Ultimately, and sometimes there is a time and place for that, certainly. But it is something I tend towards, and I think a lot of business owners do too. And it's something that Saint Kolbe had to fight off, and it eventually he really started to succumb to it. Yeah, and it's a reminder that even the great saints can. So how much more should we pay attention to it if he was tempted by it? But that is why the name. He used what was out there, especially in audio medium, which is very fitting to glorify God, and used it, and insofar as you can use that medium for good, he did, and that's what we're trying to do.
Love that. I'm gonna go one more because you brought it up. I'd love to hear how do you think Saint Maximilian Kolbe, what would he be doing if he were around today? Imagine you run into him and he's got that passion for communication, and what would he be doing today? I interviewed a priest, Father Michael Garcia recently, and he's big into AI. And of course, right after I interviewed him, the Pope sent out a letter saying, "Hey, I don't want priests using AI to compose their homilies."
Yes.
So he forwarded that to me. But one of the things we joked about is you can't spell faith without AI. So, and there you can go down that path. But
yeah.
Let's finish with that. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think he'd be doing today if he was around?
Yeah, that's a really good
with
question.
The technology we have with podcasts, the World Wide Web, YouTube, all that's around.
Yeah, I do. That's a really interesting question. I wonder about that. I mean, my initial thought is he would probably just go into podcasting, primarily because and why I say that terrestrial radio still exists, and why I say podcasting instead of radio. One, recently, and this is probably a lagging indicator, but recently in terms of listenership, podcasting has actually surpassed traditional radio. This happened pretty recently. Some data came out, and it's kind of clear. Like, obviously, it was going that way, and though functionally they are the same. Actually, you know what? I think he would probably be, and one of our sort of core tenets at Saint Kolbe Studios is opposition to vulgarity. The podcast charts are filled with garbage. Now, podcasting is it's a medium that is broadly a little cleaner, and I'm using that with a real asterisk. But it's at least better than YouTube, say, or certainly TikTok, Instagram Reels and such.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it is a slightly better medium, but it is still filled plenty with, hedonistic dating tips and sex stuff and whatnot. And this isn't just to pick on the left. I mean, there's some horrific like barstool sports nonsense and like hyper capitalism and the pursuit of profit above the good of man. But even still, and all this to say, I think even still, that's probably where he would be, because the medium doesn't need to be that way. It's not inherent to the medium that you have to have Call Her Daddy. Like, it is just, it happens to be the medium that, what is her name? Alex Cooper, I think, uses. Terrestrial radio it's not dead. It's certainly not dead, but it's dying. It's dying out. I mean, it's all of it, for one, is like owned by maybe 4 companies. I mean, Alpha Media is huge, Town Square. Like, there's not a whole. It's a functional monopoly, or I guess a functional oligopoly, and podcasting is much more democratized in so far as or rather because barrier to entry is so low, which is bad and good all at once.
Sure,
but I think it's a net positive. Like I love that the barrier to entry is low, because you can, if you're really good, and you have something good to say, or you have a talent, whatnot, you can get on there and you can be successful without throwing a lot of money. Try building a radio station. It's actually very expensive and very restrictive. One of the benefits of that is, the FCC has some regulatory power, and so you can only do things that are so profane. So, you got that for radio. But for the most part, I mean, the future of it is podcasting, because ironically enough, I listen to radio because I don't have Spotify Premium. Like, my wife and I got rid of every streaming service, like including Spotify. It's like, I just don't want the infinite available to me at all times. Like, I kind of miss it, but like, I don't use it. So I listen to the radio. But podcasting is, I think, it is the medium by which people lean in and they choose what content they're going to listen to, what content they're going to take on as part of themselves. And they can either become better by listening to good things, or they can become worse by listening to bad things, but there is no neutral in it. I made this case once, and some people got mad at me. They're like, well, what do you mean? If people are listening to bad things, it makes their culture and community worse. I was like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Like, that's self-evident. If I listen to bad things to become worse, and we do this at scale, everything becomes worse necessarily. There is no neutral in content, especially in podcasting, because it's something people lean into and they choose, and it affects them more than pretty much anything. And you can maybe make a case for YouTube, you can maybe make a case for live streamers, but even if it is not the number one, it's certainly on the Mount Rushmore of it all, and it's only getting bigger. Podcasting is it's a $1 billion industry. I mean, it's only growing, and every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because I think people want something, like, they want something that's correct. Like, they want that community, they want that fellowship, they want, and also it's a good way to learn things, be entertained and whatnot. But I think deep down the longing is for something real, and it's a lack. that people are trying to fill with it. But it's not neutral. This medium is not neutral, and I think very few things are, if anything, properly neutral. Some things are like a little bit good or a little bit bad. Some things almost like neutral, but this isn't one of those. You either get better or you get worse based on the content that's playing in your ears. But
I think that's beautiful.
You can't help but be affected.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I recently met Nick Stumphauser. He was on Matt Fradd recently and talked about Shift Your Phone. It's a great app that gets all the social media. So I have YouTube Premium, I have Spotify, I have all those apps, but I shift my phone off during the weekend so that I'm not looking at it. The algorithm cannot get me because I can't access any of those apps, Facebook, Stream, any of them, Facebook, my YouTube channel, my LinkedIn. I can't access any of those things because they're shifted off, and I'm paying for them, but when I want to, I can just go to my computer, and it makes it a little bit harder, less easy. So then and then if I'm going to take the time to go all the way to my office, log into my computer, put on my headphones, and you can walk around with the wireless headphones nowadays. It better be worth it, right?
Yeah. It's just enough friction. No, you're absolutely,
You got to create barriers so that you are not doom scrolling. I did a CEO retreat at the end of the year, and 6 out of 6 CEOs that were in attendance, when I said, what would be one thing that we could concentrate on that would make you more productive? And they said, stop doom scrolling. These are CEOs running big organizations, and they are getting captured by the algorithm. So,
well, I mean, it's billions of dollars in consumer psychology. You've hit on something. I know we're at time. I won't go into it. I use something called the brick.
Yes,
same idea.
One of my clients uses it. Yeah,
I love it. I have that. On my computer, I have something called freedom.to, I believe it is. Freedom app. It blocks your stuff. I'm a big believer in single-use tech and in dumb phones, in like blockers for all of that. It's a thing that I think we're getting to the point where it's clear that your phone is bad for you. At least if you let it be more than a tool, it's bad for you, and it's engineered to be more than a tool. You're an adult. You need to stop being addicted to that. And there are so many things that you can do. Just do it. When people are like, "Oh, I spend too much time on my phone," stop. It's actually, it's not easy. Yeah. It took me probably a year using the brick, and now I just don't crave it anymore. And my work is better for it. And now I can unbrick my phone when I need it, and I'm not tempted to scroll. I want to re-brick it. I want it to go away.
Yeah.
But it did. In fairness, it's not that it's not hard. It is hard. But you're an adult. You know it's a problem. Do something about it. Buy the brick. It's $50. Get Shift. Get Freedom.
Get Shift.
Lock everything down. Create schedules. All of it works automatically. I can't override it. I don't manually choose it. It happens to me. I don't get it.
Same thing. I find that was what I found the best. I literally can only access it during certain hours, and that's it. And if I'm outside of those hours, guess what? You better go find your computer and do it. And if it's that important, but then you know what? You realize, because that dopamine hit from the likes and you want to see, how did that clip do? How did that video do? You know what? You don't need to know that. And your family's right in front of you. You're trying to have dinner. So let's not do that. Let's finish on this note. What would Saint Maximilian Kolbe's podcast be called? I'm just going to put you on the spot. What would his podcast be called if he was around today?
That's a good question. I'm sure it would be something like the Militia of the Immaculata show, something like that. I'm sure it would be Marion. I know that. Or it would just be burn your phone. Just throw your phone into the fire. It would either be very Marion, or it would be fire and brimstone about addictive tech. It would certainly be one of maybe both. Bonus points if he could work both of those in.
I love that. Joe, we've gone way over, but this has been such a great conversation, guys. If you're listening, you've got the show notes. You know how to get a hold of Joe Coleman. If you're a faith-based leader who wants to grow your audience and reach more people using your podcast, I highly, highly recommend Joe Coleman. Let's make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe, make sure you let your friends know about this podcast so we can reach more people and help them lead different. Joe Coleman, what do you say we end the show on that note?
Why not?
Thank you so much, Joe. It has been a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to airing this episode and sharing your wisdom with our audience. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.